Tucker is being called the most dangerous anti-Semite in America by people like Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, Josh Hammer for speaking out against Zionism.
I honestly don't know who that guy is, but I've never called Tucker Carlson an anti-Semite.
Anyone who has the slightest problem with Zionism is immediately condemned as a Nazi.
You're saying anti-Zionism is the most censored view in America, and then
I didn't say that.
It, and then you come out here and defend an actual anti-Semite, Nick Fuentes.
No, what did I say in defense of Nick Fuentes, lady?
I'm really here for the Fuentes discussion. It is funny when you hear a boomer like, Bill O'Reilly. Look, Bill's been in the game for a long time, but to think he's gonna like go toe to toe with Fuentes and outclass him in some sort of debate setting is just like insane. It's insane. So yeah, if you guys saw my last video, my prediction was we are going to see Fuentes on Piers Morgan very shortly because Piers cares about those dollars. He could try this virtue signaling BS that he's always doing. I like him as a host, don't get me wrong, but sometimes the virtue signaling is just out of control. Anyway, that's enough for me. Let's get into it.
Anti-Semitic extremist Nick Fuentes has enjoyed a lot of exposure recently, not least from a big New York Times profile, which claimed Fuentes was Charlie Kirk's bitter enemy. Now he's becoming his successor. Many have debated his recent appearance on the Tucker Carlson show with the usual commentary about interviewing styles and platforming. But Fuentes himself is not really the main issue here. Neither are the so-called groypers who follow him. He's just a symbol of a far bigger struggle whose outcome will have a far bigger consequence. It's a battle over who controls the conservative movement, what it stands for, and ultimately what MAGA will mean after Donald Trump. This is why, even as we speak, debate continues to rage about whether Charlie Kirk was turning against Israel. And this is why leading figures in the conservative movement are openly attacking one another and not their opponents. And this is why some are saying that Charlie Kirk was holding MAGA together. Ben Shapiro is making the case that MAGA risks being captured by online extremists just as liberals were captured by the ultra-woke, and that social media has conned them into thinking ordinary people will agree.
Americans are not pro-segregation, pro-rape, anti-woman, pro-child marriage, anti-black, anti-Jew, anti-Indian, anti-Latino, anti-Constitution, pro-Hitler nutjobs like Nick Fuentes. And Americans are not pro-Putin, pro-Iran, pro-China, pro-Venezuela, pro-Hamas, pro-Fuentes, pro-Tate idiots.
Sorry about that pause issue there. Dude, these ad hominem attacks are killing me. Have the guy on, Ben. Your tactics have failed. Miserably. Absolutely miserably. Have the guy on. You're very smart. Debate him. Prove you are better than him in the realm, the arena of ideas. I mean, yeah. This is what they're calling the woke right. I just found out what that was like a day ago. Like now I'm seeing it everywhere. The woke right is out of control. Like when did we start canceling people? Beat them in the arena, man.
Like Tucker Carlson. They hate this vile garbage. This is our party, and this is our conservative movement. And I will not stand by while it is handed over to...
Dude, I'm sorry. I got to pause one more time. He's saying this is our party. And I came up as a guy like Ben Shapiro introduced me to conservatism, his own videos from about 10 years ago. But he is Israel first. Do not say this is our party when your agenda is only to bolster that of Israel above everything else. That is the problem. So when you say there's a split in the conservative movement, it's because guys like me and a lot of young dudes are like, yo, why are we spending all of our money in Israel? The same issue we had when we were funding Ukraine to, no end, right? We don't like our taxpayer dollars, our soldiers, our equipment, all being used in never-ending war cycles. And don't tell me it benefits the U.S. somehow. I don't know how.
those who betray the most fundamental principles I have spent my entire life defending and advocating. That is a path to defeat and a path to moral oblivion. I reject it because if we lose the right, we will lose to the left. And either way, we'll lose the country.
Well, on the other side of the aisle are those who argue that Trump's entire coalition was based on one main principle, America first.
Boom.
And in the most part, this is fundamentally incompatible with America's unquestioning support for Israel. In their view, all of the calls for censorship and condemnation of certain people are generally all traced back to that.
There is what Politico is calling a civil war in the Republican Party. And it's over, of course, identity, because the only wars we have in this country, the only sanctioned wars we have domestically are about identity, BLM, anti-Semitism. Of course, that's not really what they're ever about. These are proxy wars. These are wars waged on behalf of people who aren't directly participating for reasons that are never openly stated. And this war is actually about what comes after Donald Trump. Our foreign policy is not wholly dependent on the whims of Israel. Of course, we have, acting in lots of parts of the world that have nothing to do with Israel, but it is unduly influenced by the concerns of Israel. And in some cases, the U.S. government has acted, and these are all well known. The Iraq War, for example, has acted in ways that hurt the United States in order to help Israel. It has put the aims of a foreign power above its own interests.
Well, Nick Fuentes routinely says outrageously vile things, and he has a platform and an audience of his own. He's a flashpoint because some people believe there's nothing more conservative than airing ideas in the open, uncensored, and letting people decide. And some people believe conservatives have a moral duty not to hear them out, but to crush them altogether.
Crush them in debate.
I'm joined by my panel in a moment. First, Bill O'Reilly, the best-selling author and host of No Spin.
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm going to skip Bill. I've heard this spiel a bunch of times. Let's go to the panel. What does the panel have to say about Mr. Fuentes? Come on, y'all. Dang. We give Bill 40 minutes of the show? All right, let's go.
Joining me now, Zach Costello, host of the Zach Costello podcast, Scott Horton, the author of Provoked, and Batia Ungar Sargon, the weekend anchor and host of Batia on News
Wonder
Nation.
where her ties are.
To all of you.
Where her
Batia,
allegiances are tied to.
Of the right-wing conservative movement in America ripping itself to pieces?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Pierce. It's great to be here. I'm a little bit of a skeptic of the idea that the right is ripping itself to pieces. I think if you look at who has come out sort of in support of Tucker and Fuentes and the uncritical platforming of Fuentes and who has come out against it, there's a real divide between, politicians and then content creators. So conservatives and people who make their money, creating content for YouTube, for example. You haven't really seen a lot of people who are major figures on the right in terms of building political coalitions coming out on the side of Fuentes, and you haven't seen the content creators coming out on the side of saying, look, that interview should have been more aggressive. So I really think this is a divide about media and a sort of media turf war rather than really dividing the right. The conservative movement as such seems to me rather united on the side of saying, look, we have to have a red line when it comes to Holocaust deniers, anti-Black people who believe in segregation and so forth. And then the content creators who are many of whom, by the way, are sort of, it's very hard to say if they're conservatives or progressives anymore, who are more in favor of this, no, let's hear from anybody in any, which way. Anybody who has a big following is welcome at the table.
Or just anybody.
It's an interesting debate, Zach Costello. I was just having it with Bill O'Reilly about how you decided whether to platform people like Fuentes, given that he clearly has got an increasingly big following and influence. It's a bit like Andrew Tate, slightly different, in that he spews a lot of misogyny and Fuentes spews a lot of anti-Semitism. I mean, just some of the things that he said. Women want to be raped. Women shouldn't be in politics. The 19th Amendment should be repealed. Jim Crow is better for Black people. Holding Heil Hitler Fridays and saying he was really cool. Comparing the murder of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust to baking cookies and so on. He's a nasty little troll. Clearly anti-Semitic. I think that's beyond any doubt. Should that mean he never gets platformed? And if he is platformed by people, should he be given a much more rigorous examination than perhaps Tucker Carlson gave him?
If you made it this far, I really appreciate you. Take a second to like and subscribe because getting subscribers is hard.
Criticism with regard to how he handled the interview with Nick Fuentes. I mean, I think the way the free speech mechanism works, though, Tucker Carlson, he hosted him for an interview. Nick was then allowed to share his views, and people can argue whether Tucker should have pushed back more or not. But Tucker's position was he was going to, and he said this at the outset of his interview, was to allow Nick to explain his beliefs and how he came to believe them. Tucker never said it was a debate. So Tucker's getting a lot of heat for how he conducted the interview. But when I watched the segment with Bill O'Reilly, and Ben Shapiro got in some trouble for this past week as well. It's this dismissive, condescending way that you would call, like, what you would describe, or how I would describe the way these kind of boomer conservatives think about Nick Fuentes and the things that he believes in. The reality is there is a large portion of the anti-establishment conservative right that is unhappy with a number of things that the Trump administration has not delivered on. One of those issues is the Epstein files. Another issue is the America First movement with regard to support of Israel. I would disagree with the premise that this is just a media or social media turf war. We just saw in these last elections,
that was a weird take.
Conservatives got destroyed. And people are saying, and they're dismissing it, oh, these are blue states, it doesn't matter. It does matter in that in almost every single county. I live here in Virginia. This is just one example, but this happened across the board in these elections. In every single county in this election, voters moved further left by a substantial margin. There is a segment in America, I'll say it again, an anti-establishment, young conservative group in America that needs to be taken seriously. And they're talking about the divide in the MAGA coalition. The divide in the MAGA coalition needs to be taken seriously because these anti-establishment, young conservatives, which got Trump over the hump to victory in the 2024 election, if everybody can remember, the popularity of Trump going on Joe Rogan and Theo Vaughn and all of these other podcasters, this is where the anti-establishment men are. So to just dismiss them, as Bill O'Reilly's doing, as Ben Shapiro did, or just calling this a social media turf war, I think is a huge mistake. Bill O'Reilly, for example, said, I would never have him on my channel. I would never platform Nick Fuentes because he couldn't hold a candle to me. I would destroy him. It's like, then do it, Bill. Have him on and do it. I'll admit, Nick Fuentes has some historically proven bad ideas. Okay? But there's an America First portion of what he believes in that many do take seriously, that many do believe in, especially, as I mentioned, within that anti-establishment, young conservative Christian segment that really helped Donald Trump to victory. So I think this needs to be taken more seriously than a lot of these boomer conservatives are leading us to believe.
That guy hit the nail on the head. I don't know what Batya was talking about, this media turf war, social media versus legacy media. We already know that legacy media is pretty much a wrap, unless you're Fox News, because Fox News is pulling in billions of views quarterly online. That was a stupid take. This guy hit the nail on the head. These boomers want to just say, oh, and yeah, Ben's a boomer at this point when it comes to his time on air, right? They're literally just saying, that guy's bad because I say so, and we don't even need to talk to him. Where have we heard that before? That's the same thing that's been said about Trump for 10 years. It's played out. Nobody wants to hear it. Beat the guy in the arena. This guy hit the nail on the head.
Right. So, Scott Horton, I want to play you a clip. This is a Fuentes talking about Trumpism being done.
This movement is over. And now the question is, what comes next? Trumpism is over. I hate to inform you, this administration is done. Stick a fork in it, it's fucking over. We played this game. It's deja vu. I was there for the first term, and I remember right up until 2020, I was saying, okay, we could still make a difference. I remember in like spring 2020, I was coping. Trust me when I tell you it's over. We're out of time.
Scott Horton, what do you make of all this? Because I think it's a mistake to underestimate someone like Fuentes, but also a mistake to overestimate the influence of someone like Fuentes. But the impact, you can see the ripple effect now on the conservative right particularly amongst the likes of Ben Shapiro at loggerheads with Tucker Carlson and so on. These are big figures on the conservative right with big influences, lots of followers. What do you make of what's happening here? How significant could it be?
I've got a lot of things on my mind, Pierce. First of all, thank you so much for having me back here. It's great to be with you. Secondly, I'm so frustrated that I wasn't able to be on with O'Reilly and have that debate or discussion with him about so many things. He said quite a few things that I thought were really important about inflation and other things, about how fake the New York Times story about Trump and Epstein is this morning and things like that, where he really is right on. Then there's so much there that's just so frustrating. And primarily his refusal, and no offense, but I think Batya's refusal also to recognize, or maybe she's part of this, what I mean by this, that if you're familiar with the old saying about prohibition of alcohol, that it was an alliance, a conspiracy of interest between the bootleggers and the Baptists, right? The Baptists wanted people to stop drinking. The bootleggers wanted the price to go artificially high so they could make a killing, right? And so they wanted it that way. It was the same thing here, where, and by the way, I should give credit to the great Bob Murphy, who talked about this on his podcast this week. And what's happened here is, especially on the right, but everywhere, all across the political spectrum, anyone who has the slightest problem with Zionism or with Zionist power and influence in the United States is immediately condemned as a Nazi and an anti-Semite. And I am saying this up front, quite honestly. I have never watched Nick Fuentes' show from beginning to end. I've seen a few clips. I'm not in the job of policing other alternative media people or like denouncing them or whatever, but I think it's pretty clear that he's essentially the result of what you could have bet on anyway. And if you keep saying that everyone who disagrees with Zionism is a Nazi who hates Jews, you're going to have a young man say, fine, that doesn't hurt me, and then go ahead and own that, and then beat that horse to death, which is what he's done, right? Is stake that out. And I saw him saying the other day, a clip of him, I think in context, of him saying, you say Hitler, 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 every time anyone says anything about any of these issues.
Yep.
And then he says, but that word no longer has any power here. That was a long time ago. It has nothing to do with what's going on with us.
Yep.
And not like that. So what's happened is Zionism, which has a total kind of stranglehold and lock on the center of American politics, has marginalized anti-Zionism to the fringes, where now legitimate anti-Semites can claim to own it. And no offense, Pierce, I would have done a worse job than you, but you made a big mistake at the beginning of that interview. You played a clip of Tucker Carlson, and then you asked him about Nick Fuentes. You gave him a big escape hatch, so he didn't have to confront what his friend Tucker Carlson, who is avowedly not an anti-Semite, had to say about Israel and its influence in this country. And who's Bill O'Reilly? Bill O'Reilly is Ariel Sharon's man in the United States of America 25 years ago, who helped Israel lie America into war because they thought getting rid of Saddam would somehow weaken Iran. And mostly it was Netanyahu's faction that favored that policy, but Sharon got on board for it too. And
I'm going to wrap it up right here. Scott is absolutely killing it. Nick Fuentes is a product of being told, hey, you can't say this. You can't think that, or we're going to call you this. You're this, you're that, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that. And he's like, you know what? I am. And so are people that agree with me. That means nothing to me. It's the same thing as crying racism for 2 decades. I don't care. Call me whatever you want. You state a fact. People get offended because it's an inconvenient fact. We call that malinformation. When it's something that's true, but it's inconvenient for the state, we don't care. Yeah, Scott killed this, man. Fuentes' rise is undeniable at this point, and it's a problem for both sides of the aisle. It's going to be real interesting to see where things go from here. Anyway, if you made it this far, you're a real one. I'll catch you next time.